December 21, 1941, Oslo, Norway. In a dimly lit basement workshop, Tormod Haraldsson shivered despite his thick woolen sweater as he carefully manipulated a dental drill under a single hanging bulb. The German occupation forces patrolling above had no idea that the quiet dentist with trembling hands was about to revolutionize the Allied intelligence network across occupied Europe. He believed he was simply creating a reliable dental filling for a resistance courier, not developing a technology that would eventually connect hundreds of undercover operatives in the deadliest game of cat and mouse in modern warfare. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how a simple innovation born of necessity would transform the nature of clandestine communication during World War II, and how a mild-mannered dentist with no military training would become the unlikely hero behind one of the war's most closely guarded intelligence secrets. The journey began in 1939 when Dr. Tormod Haraldsson was known throughout Oslo as the miracle worker for difficult dental cases. At 47 years old, with thinning grey hair and spectacles that constantly slid down his nose, Haraldsson had built a reputation for innovative approaches to dental problems that other practitioners deemed impossible. His practice occupied the first floor of a respectable building on Kirkegata Street, where Norwegian professionals and occasional German officers came for his exceptional care. "Your approach is unorthodox, Dr. Haraldsson, but I cannot argue with the results," said Major Dieter Hoffmann, touching his recently repaired molar. The German officer sat in the dental chair as Haraldsson removed his gloves. "The last dentist in Berlin told me the tooth would need extraction." "Sometimes the unconventional path proves most effective, Major," Haraldsson replied with measured politeness. He maintained the professional demeanor that had protected him thus far in the occupation, neither openly resistant nor overly accommodating to the Germans who had controlled Norway since April 1940. What Major Hoffmann did not know was that beneath the dental practice, Haraldsson had created a different kind of workspace. In the basement, accessible through a concealed door in his supply closet, the dentist had established a small laboratory where his true passion flourished, experimenting with dental materials and radio technology, his lifelong hobby. That evening, after his staff had left and he had locked the clinic doors, Haraldsson descended into his basement workshop. The room contained dental equipment alongside radio components, an unusual combination that would soon prove providential. He carefully took a small journal from behind a loose brick in the wall and recorded his latest observations on amalgam composites with unusual electrical properties. "The silver tin mixture with added copper shows remarkable conductivity when cured under pressure," he wrote. "Unlike standard amalgam fillings, the microcrystalline structure forms a lattice that could potentially serve as a miniature conduit for electrical signals." His experimentation had begun innocently enough, seeking more durable dental materials for patients with bruxism who frequently cracked or damaged their fillings. But the war had changed everything, including the direction of his research. In London, at the headquarters of the Special Operations Executive, Colonel Richard Fleming reviewed intelligence reports with growing frustration. A distinguished career officer with a reputation for unconventional thinking, Fleming directed the Norwegian section of SOE, tasked with supporting resistance operations in the occupied country. "We've lost another 3 operators in the last month," Fleming told his assistant, Captain Sarah Winthrop, as he paced the office with its walls covered in maps of Scandinavia. "The Germans are tracking our radio transmissions. Our standard sets are too bulky, and operators can't transmit for more than 20 minutes before detection units triangulate their position." Captain Winthrop, one of the few women in such a senior intelligence position, nodded gravely. At 32, she had already established herself as an expert in communications technology before being recruited to SOE. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her expression remained composed despite the dire news. "The fundamental problem is size versus power, sir," she explained. "Our compact sets don't have sufficient range, while the more powerful units are too large to conceal effectively. What we need is a completely new approach to transmitter design." Fleming stopped pacing and looked at her thoughtfully. "We need someone who thinks outside conventional radio engineering, someone the Germans wouldn't suspect. Across the North Sea in Bergen, Norway, resistance courier Erik Johansen was having dental problems. At 29, the former fisherman had been running messages and small packages between resistance cells for 18 months. His aching molar threatened his upcoming mission to deliver microfilmed intelligence to a British submarine rendezvous. "You must see Haraldson in Oslo," his contact Magnus Olsen told him. Olsen was 56, a former professor of literature who now coordinated communications for resistance groups in western Norway. The silver-haired academic spoke in hushed tones as they met in the back room of a bookstore. "He is discreet and trustworthy. He has helped many of our people." The coded reference was not lost on Johansen. Helped meant more than dental work. It meant Haraldson was connected to the resistance. What Johansen didn't know was that his dental problem would provide the catalyst for one of the most significant intelligence breakthroughs of the war. 3 days later, Johansen arrived at Haraldson's practice with a legitimate dental emergency and a coded message from Olsen. As Haraldson examined the infected molar, they spoke in the careful, circumspect language of people living under occupation. "Professor Olsen speaks highly of your innovative techniques," Johansen said, as Haraldson probed the painful tooth. The dentist's hands paused momentarily before continuing their work. "The professor appreciates unconventional solutions to difficult problems," Haraldson replied. "This tooth will require several visits to treat properly. Perhaps you can return tomorrow when I have more time to discuss the appropriate procedure." That night, in his basement laboratory, Haraldson met with Johansen away from potentially prying eyes or listening devices. The courier explained his real dilemma. German direction-finding teams were becoming increasingly effective at locating resistance radio operators. "Our average transmission time before detection is down to 15 minutes, Johansen explained. "We've lost 6 radio operators in the past 2 months alone. We need something the detection vans can't track as easily." Haraldson listened thoughtfully, his mind already connecting his dental research with this new problem. "Perhaps there is a way," he said slowly. "I've been experimenting with dental amalgams that have unusual electrical properties. With some modification, they might be used to create components for a new type of radio transmitter, one that operates on principles the Germans aren't looking for." The next morning, as German patrols moved through the streets of Oslo, Haraldson began treating Johansen's tooth while simultaneously explaining his concept in whispered fragments between the whirring of the dental drill. "Standard transmitters use quartz crystals to maintain frequency stability," Haraldson murmured as he worked, "but my amalgam composite, when properly formed and cured, can serve a similar function at a fraction of the size. If we could miniaturize key components, perhaps embed them in everyday objects." Johansen grimaced, partly from the dental work and partly from concentration. "How small could you make a functional component?" "Small enough to hide in plain sight," Haraldson replied, a plan already forming in his mind. Over the next 3 weeks, Haraldson worked feverishly in his basement workshop, applying his knowledge of dental materials to the challenge of creating miniature radio components. His breakthrough came when he discovered that his special amalgam, when compressed and cured in a particular manner, could function as a crystal rectifier, a critical component for radio receivers and transmitters. The dentist carefully documented his progress in his hidden journal. Sample 17 shows optimal conductivity patterns. When formed under 15 kilograms of pressure and cured at precisely 47 degrees Celsius, the amalgam creates a crystalline structure that can serve as an effective oscillator. The resulting component is smaller than a pea, yet performs at efficiency levels comparable to components 10 times its size. Haraldson's innovation was revolutionary, not just in miniaturizing radio components, but in creating ones that operated on slightly different frequency principles than conventional German equipment was designed to detect. His dental training had given him insights into materials science that traditional radio engineers had never considered. In London, the first hint of Haraldson's breakthrough reached SOE through a coded message delivered by a fishing boat that had made contact with the resistance. Norwegian dentist claims dental material application for communication problem, requests technical consultation. Colonel Fleming raised an eyebrow as Captain Winthrop presented the decoded message. "A dentist? Working on radio equipment? It may sound unusual, sir, but cross-disciplinary innovation often yields the most surprising results, Winthrop replied. During the Great War, some of our best advances came from unlikely sources. Fleming nodded slowly. Arrange for technical specifications to be passed to our Norwegian section, and see if we can get someone with the right expertise into Norway to evaluate this properly. Captain James Blackwood of the Royal Corps of Signals had never expected his electrical engineering background, and 4 years of dental school, abandoned when the war began, would prove the perfect combination for a covert mission. At 34, with practical experience in both fields, he was uniquely qualified to assess Haraldson's innovation. Your cover will be as a Swedish dental equipment salesman, Captain Winthrop explained during his briefing in London. You'll have 3 days in Oslo to meet Haraldsson, evaluate his technology, and make recommendations for development. Blackwood nodded, studying the forged Swedish papers. And if his technique proves viable, then you'll help establish a production process that can be replicated here and distributed to our operators in the field, Colonel Fleming interjected. This could change the equation for our people behind enemy lines. The insertion went smoothly. Blackwood arrived in Oslo aboard a commercial ship from Stockholm, his cover identity withstanding cursory German scrutiny. His meeting with Haraldsson was arranged through a dental supply company with resistance connections. Mr. Anderson, welcome, Haraldsson greeted loudly as Blackwood entered the practice, carrying a case of Swedish dental equipment. I've been looking forward to seeing the new articulator models. Once in the privacy of Haraldsson's basement laboratory, their conversation changed dramatically. Blackwood examined the miniature components Haraldsson had created, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to astonishment. This is remarkable, Blackwood said, inspecting a tiny amalgam component under a magnifying glass. You've essentially created a microscopic crystal set within a dental filling material. The applications go far beyond what we imagined. Haraldsson nodded. The principle is simple, though the execution is delicate. By embedding these components in everyday objects, fountain pens, hairbrushes, even artificial limbs or dental work, we can create transmitters that are virtually undetectable by conventional means. Over the next 2 days, the dentist and the disguised signals officer refined the technique. Blackwood contributed his knowledge of radio engineering, helping Haraldsson optimize the electrical properties of his amalgam components. Together, they created the first prototype of what would soon be called the dental transmitter, a radio device so small it could be concealed in a hollowed-out molar. The genius is in the composition, Blackwood noted as they tested the tiny device. By using 5% more copper and introducing traces of palladium, you've created an amalgam that serves as both a structural filling and a functional electrical component. The Germans would need to perform a metallurgical analysis of a suspect's dental work to detect it. Before leaving Oslo, Blackwood memorized the precise formula and manufacturing technique. No written records would cross the North Sea. The information was too valuable to risk capture. Their final meeting concluded with Haraldsson providing one last insight. The material must be kept absolutely dry during the initial setting period, the dentist emphasized. Even slight humidity alters the crystalline structure and reduces effectiveness. That's why dental training is actually ideal for production. We're accustomed to maintaining dry fields during procedures. As Blackwood prepared to return to London with this vital intelligence, events in Oslo took a dangerous turn. A German counterintelligence officer, Major Klaus Werner, had begun investigating unusual radio transmissions detected near the city center. Werner, a former police detective from Hamburg, had developed a reputation for methodical investigations that had already uncovered 2 resistance cells. The signals exhibit unusual characteristics, Werner told his team as they reviewed detection reports. Standard triangulation gives inconsistent results, suggesting either a moving transmitter or one operating on principles our equipment isn't calibrated to track precisely. Werner's investigation led him to examine businesses near where partial signals had been detected. Haraldsson's dental practice was among dozens of locations flagged for routine inspection. The morning after Blackwood's departure, Werner arrived at Haraldsson's clinic, accompanied by 2 soldiers. "A routine inspection, Doctor," Werner explained with cold politeness. "We are checking all businesses in this district for compliance with occupation regulations." Haraldson maintained his composed professional demeanor despite his racing heart. "Of course, Major. My practice is open for inspection. I was just preparing for my first patient of the day." Werner moved methodically through the clinic, examining dental records and supply inventories while his men checked for hidden spaces. When they approached the supply closet concealing the entrance to Haraldson's basement laboratory, the dentist felt his mouth go dry. "This appears to be standard storage," Werner noted, glancing at the dental supplies. He pushed aside several boxes, his gloved hand inches from the concealed door mechanism. At that moment, the clinic's front door opened, and Major Hoffmann, Haraldson's German patient, entered for his scheduled appointment. "Werner, what brings counterintelligence to my dentist's office?" Hoffmann asked, surprise evident in his voice. Werner straightened and offered a salute to the superior officer. "Standard inspection, Major. We've detected unusual radioactivity in this district." Hoffmann laughed, touching his recently repaired tooth. "I can assure you Dr. Haraldson is above suspicion. He's the only man in Oslo who could save this troublesome molar. Half the officers in the regional headquarters come to him for treatment." The counterintelligence officer hesitated, looking between Hoffmann and Haraldson. "Nevertheless, we must be thorough." "Of course. But perhaps you could continue after my appointment. I have a meeting with General Brauer at 1100 hours, and this tooth has been causing considerable discomfort," Hoffmann replied, his tone making it clear this was not merely a suggestion. Werner reluctantly agreed to return later, unaware that the brief reprieve would give Haraldson just enough time to remove incriminating evidence from his laboratory and transfer it to a resistance courier waiting nearby. By the time Werner returned that afternoon, the basement laboratory had been transformed into a simple storage space for dental supplies, with no trace of radio components or research materials. The dentist's journal and prototype devices were already on their way to a safe house outside the city. In London, Blackwood's return with Haraldson's technique created immediate excitement within SOE. A dedicated workshop was established in a requisitioned dental practice in South Kensington, where dental technicians worked alongside radio engineers to perfect the miniature transmitter technology. "The beauty of Haraldson's approach is its simplicity," Blackwood explained to Colonel Fleming and Captain Winthrop as they observed the first London-made components being tested. "The amalgam creates a crystalline lattice that serves the same function as bulkier quartz components, but can be shaped and concealed within practically anything." Captain Winthrop, who had taken personal interest in the project, added, "Initial tests show the transmitters have a range of approximately 8 kilometers, sufficient for urban operations, and can be extended to 20 kilometers with minimal additional equipment. More importantly, they operate on frequency variations that German detection equipment isn't calibrated to identify precisely." Colonel Fleming nodded approvingly. "How quickly can we deploy these to our field operators?" "We can have the first units ready within 2 weeks," Blackwood replied. "The production process requires dental expertise, but once established, we can train technicians to manufacture components in quantity." The first operational test came in February 1942, when resistance operator Ingrid Zollberg received a modified fountain pen containing one of Haraldson's amalgam components. Zollberg, 31, had previously been forced to relocate her traditional radio set 3 times in as many weeks due to German detection efforts. Operating from an apartment in Copenhagen, Zollberg assembled the miniaturized transmitter according to her instructions and began sending intelligence reports using the new technology. Her first transmission lasted 45 minutes, 3 times longer than previously possible, without drawing German attention. "The device performed flawlessly," she reported through her handler. "I transmitted from the same location for 4 consecutive days, with no indication of detection activity in my vicinity." Similar success stories began arriving from across occupied Europe. In Paris, SOE agent Marcel Dubois transmitted critical information about German troop movements while sitting in a café directly across from Gestapo headquarters. In Brussels, resistance courier Anna Verlinden carried important communications equipment disguised as ordinary dental bridges. The German counterintelligence services found themselves increasingly frustrated by their inability to locate these new transmission sources. In Berlin, the Radio Security Service held an emergency conference in April 1942 to address the alarming development. Colonel Heinrich Müller of the Radio Security Service addressed the assembled intelligence officers with unconcealed frustration. Our direction-finding teams report inconsistent results across all occupied territories. Resistance radio traffic has increased 28%, yet successful interceptions have declined by nearly 40%. Major Werner, who had been recalled from Oslo to consult on the problem, offered his assessment. The transmissions appear to pulse at irregular intervals and utilize frequency shifts that our equipment registers only partially. Standard triangulation becomes ineffective because our receivers aren't calibrated to the full spectrum these devices are using. The meeting concluded with orders to develop new detection equipment, a process that would take months of research and testing. In the meantime, the dental transmitters continued to revolutionize Allied intelligence gathering across Europe. By mid-1942, Haraldson's innovation had expanded beyond simple transmitters. Working with resistance machinist Erik Larsen, the dentist developed methods to create receivers and even rudimentary encryption components using his special amalgam materials. Their workshop had relocated to a remote farmhouse outside Oslo after the close call with Major Werner. Here, Haraldson trained a small team of resistance members in producing the specialized components. Among his students was Karin Nielsen, a 26-year-old dental assistant whose steady hands and attention to detail made her particularly adept at crafting the tiny devices. The mixture must be precisely 47% silver, 30% tin, 14% copper, 5% zinc and 4% palladium. Haraldson instructed as Nielsen carefully measured ingredients under a magnifying glass. Even a 1% variation will compromise the electrical properties. Nielsen nodded, completing the mixture with perfect precision. And the curing process? 15 minutes under pressure, then 42 minutes at exactly 47 degrees Celsius, Haraldson replied. The temperature control is absolutely critical, too hot, and the crystalline structure breaks down, too cold, and proper conductivity never develops. Their work was interrupted by the arrival of resistance leader Johann Berg, who brought troubling news. The Germans have developed new detection equipment, Berg informed them grimly. They've located 2 operators in the past week, both using our amalgam transmitters. Haraldson removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose anxiously. They've adapted more quickly than we anticipated. We'll need to modify our approach. That night the dentist worked through until dawn, experimenting with variations in his amalgam formula. By morning, exhausted but triumphant, he had developed a new composition that operated on yet another set of frequency principles. The addition of minute traces of rhodium alters the conductivity pattern, he explained to Berg and Nielsen. The signal characteristics will be different enough to confound their new detection methods, at least temporarily. The intelligence battle continued in this fashion throughout 1942 and into 1943. Innovation followed by German countermeasures, followed by further refinements from Haraldson and his growing team of specialists. Each iteration of the technology kept Allied operators one step ahead of German detection capabilities. In London, the success of the dental transmitters led to an expanded program integrating Haraldson's techniques into the broader SOE equipment arsenal. Captain Winthrop, now promoted to major, oversaw the operation that produced hundreds of disguised communications devices, each containing amalgam components based on the Norwegian dentist's formula. Haraldson's innovation has transformed our entire approach to clandestine communications, Winthrop explained to visiting American OSS representatives in July 1943. We're no longer limited to bulky radio sets that put operators at immediate risk. The technology has been miniaturized to the point where agents can transmit vital intelligence while walking down a busy street or sitting in a public park. Colonel Fleming added, "The statistical impact has been remarkable. Operator survival rates have increased by 62% since implementation began. Mission effectiveness has improved by almost 40% due to more regular and secure communications." American OSS Captain Robert Miller examined one of the devices, a hairbrush with a transmitter concealed in its handle. Ingenious. And you say this was developed by a dentist with no formal training in radio engineering? Precisely why it works, Winthrop replied. Haraldson approached the problem from an entirely different perspective than conventional radio engineers. His knowledge of metallurgy and material properties from dental science led him to solutions no one in communications technology had considered. By early 1944, as preparations for the Allied invasion of Europe accelerated, Haraldson's technology had become a critical component of intelligence operations. Resistance networks throughout occupied territories relied on his miniaturized communications devices to coordinate activities and report German defenses and troop movements. In February 1944, however, disaster struck. A resistance courier captured during a random security check was found carrying several of the specialized amalgam components. Under interrogation, he revealed enough information for German counterintelligence to connect the devices to dental technology. Major Werner, who had continued investigating the unusual transmissions since his visit to Haraldson's practice, immediately made the connection. The Norwegian dentist, he told his superiors. Haraldsson, I suspected him 2 years ago but was diverted before completing my search. A Gestapo team was dispatched to Oslo with orders to arrest Haraldsson and anyone connected to his practice. When they arrived, they found the dental clinic operating normally, but Haraldsson himself was nowhere to be found. His assistant claimed he had traveled to Stockholm for a dental conference 3 days earlier. In truth, Haraldsson had been warned by resistance contacts in German administration and evacuated to a mountain hideout. From there, emergency plans were activated to relocate his production facility and evacuate key personnel. Karin Nilsson was preparing to destroy remaining equipment and materials when German forces surrounded the farmhouse workshop. With no escape possible, she took the only action available to prevent the technology from falling into enemy hands. She triggered the workshop's emergency destruction protocol, a controlled fire designed to incinerate all evidence. The resulting blaze consumed the building completely. German investigators later found only melted equipment and unidentifiable chemical residues. Nilsson herself was captured, but maintained her cover as a simple farm girl employed as a cleaner, revealing nothing despite harsh interrogation. The Germans never captured Haraldsson. In March 1944, a British submarine extracted the dentist and his most critical technical notes from a fjord north of Bergen. 6 days later, he arrived in Scotland and was immediately transported to London to continue his work under direct SOE protection. I never imagined my research into dental materials would lead to this, Haraldsson told Colonel Fleming upon his arrival at SOE headquarters. The dentist looked thinner and more careworn than in pre-war photographs, but his eyes retained their intelligent intensity. I was simply trying to create better fillings for patients with difficult dental conditions. The most transformative innovations often begin that way, Fleming replied. Your work has saved countless lives and provided intelligence that will help shorten this war. In the months leading up to D-Day, Haraldsson worked with an expanded team of British and American specialists, refining his technology for use in the coming invasion. His amalgam components were incorporated into equipment carried by advanced reconnaissance teams and resistance operatives tasked with reporting German defensive positions along the Atlantic Wall. The impact of these miniaturized communication devices on the success of the Normandy landings was significant, though largely unrecognized in public accounts. Resistance operatives using Haraldsson's technology provided continuous intelligence updates on German troop movements and defensive preparations without detection, information that proved crucial for Allied planning. Major General Sir Colin Gubbins, head of SOE, later wrote in a classified assessment, "The miniaturized communication equipment developed from Dr. Haraldsson's dental technology provided an intelligence advantage that materially contributed to operational success. The ability to maintain consistent communications without detection gave planners current information that previous technologies could not have delivered without unacceptable risk to operators." As Allied forces pushed across Europe in late 1944 and early 1945, Haraldsson's innovation continued to play a vital role in intelligence operations. The technology was particularly valuable in urban environments where conventional radio equipment would have been quickly detected. In December 1944, the dentist received a surprising visitor at his London laboratory, Karin Nielsen, who had survived German captivity when resistance fighters liberated the transport, taking her to a detention camp in Germany. Now she joined Haraldson's development team, bringing valuable field experience with the technology. The components performed remarkably well under extreme conditions, Nielsen reported, showing Haraldson a modified wristwatch that had transmitted vital intelligence from inside a German command post. Even in close proximity to German detection equipment, the signals remained unidentifiable to their operators. As the war in Europe approached its conclusion, plans were already being developed to adapt Haraldson's technology for potential use in the Pacific theater and, looking further ahead, for peacetime intelligence operations. The dental amalgam components represented a fundamental breakthrough in miniaturized electronics that would influence communications technology for decades to come. On May 7, 1945, as news of Germany's surrender reached London, Haraldson sat quietly in his laboratory, reflecting on the unexpected journey from dental innovation to wartime espionage. He carefully packed away his instruments, knowing that his work had forever changed both fields. "What will you do after the war, Doctor?" Major Winthrop asked, finding him alone with his thoughts. Haraldson smiled faintly. "Return to dentistry, I suppose, though perhaps with a somewhat different perspective on the potential applications of my research." In the years following the war, the full story of Haraldson's dental transmitters remained classified, known only to intelligence agencies and the operatives whose lives had been saved by the technology. The dentist himself returned to Norway in late 1945, reopening his practice in Oslo and continuing his research into advanced dental materials. The legacy of his wartime innovation extended far beyond the conflict. The principles he discovered in working with specialized amalgams informed early developments in solid-state electronics and miniaturized communications equipment. Components based on his techniques were still used in covert operations well into the 1960s, though by then semiconductor technology had begun to supplant the amalgam-based devices. For his contributions, Haraldson received the King's Medal for Courage in the Cause of Freedom, presented in a private ceremony at the Royal Palace in Oslo. The citation mentioned only extraordinary services to Allied intelligence operations, the specific nature of his contribution remaining classified for decades afterward. Perhaps more meaningful to Haraldson than official recognition was a letter he received in 1947 from Erik Johansson, the resistance courier whose dental problem had initiated their collaboration. "I recently learned that 16 of my colleagues survived their mission specifically because of the communication devices you created," Johansson wrote. "They returned to their families never knowing that their lives had been protected by a dental filling. Sometimes the most profound impacts come from the most unexpected sources." Tormod Haraldson passed away in 1968 at the age of 76. His revolutionary contribution to wartime intelligence known to only a small circle of former operatives and intelligence officials. His dental practice was continued by his nephew, who knew his uncle only as a skilled dentist with unusual interests in metallurgy and radio equipment. It was not until 1984, when classified wartime records began to be released, that the full story of the dental transmitters became publicly known. A BBC documentary titled "The Dentist Who Fooled Hitler" brought Haraldson's innovation to public attention, revealing how a technique developed for dental patients had transformed wartime intelligence gathering. Former SOE officer James Blackwood, interviewed for the documentary, summarized Haraldson's impact. What made his innovation so revolutionary was that it came from completely outside conventional thinking. While traditional radio engineers tried to make existing equipment smaller, Haraldson reimagined the fundamental components using materials familiar to him as a dentist, but foreign to communications specialists. In doing so, he created something the enemy literally couldn't comprehend. They were looking for conventional radio signals, while our operators transmitted using principles based on dental metallurgy. Today, a small display at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. contains a replica, of one of Haraldson's original amalgam components alongside more modern intelligence-gathering equipment. The accompanying text notes that the unassuming dental material represented one of the most significant technological breakthroughs in wartime intelligence history, an innovation that saved countless lives and accelerated Allied victory through improved intelligence capabilities. The story of Tormod Haraldsson reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, that the most revolutionary ideas frequently emerge at the intersection of disparate fields, and that sometimes the most profound solutions arise not from conventional expertise, but from approaching problems with entirely fresh perspectives. In the shadow of global conflict, a dentist's quest to create better tooth fillings became the foundation for technology that helped turn the tide of war, proving once again that history's course can be altered by the most unlikely individuals working in the most ordinary circumstances, transformed by extraordinary times into heroes, whose impact extends far beyond their original intentions. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.